Good evening, everyone. Yes, it's evening from here. This is International Master Oladapo do again. It's actually been a minute, and I played in like about I think about 2 3 tournaments lately. Yeah, actually, I played in the Blacks Knights. No, I played in Champ City. I played in the Black Knights. I played in the Action, and then I played in the DC Action. Okay, so this game I'm bringing to us today is my last round game from the Black Knights Chess Championship. All right, so this is my game from the Black Knights Chess Championship. They actually the sixth Black Knights Chess Championship. This game actually was yeah, it was in the last round, and I think I was going to the last round with I think half a point ahead of the next person, and I only needed to get a draw to like win the game. Yeah, I was just playing for a draw to win the game, to win the tournament actually. So I was playing Raph Mikel, one of the big members of the Black Knight Chess Club that's been around for a long time. I was actually playing him in the last round of this tournament, and I had the black pieces I had the black piece on the opening. We all know to be called the Queen's Gambit. Yes, I think it was the Queen's Gambit decline. Yes. So yeah, so like I said, I never draw to win the tournament, but my opponent really came into the tournament looking to fight, which was a good thing for me, so that I don't really relax and just try to just look for a draw and win the tournament. So the game goes like this. It started with the move d4. I played d5. D5 is one of my main openings. Even though I have some others that I play occasionally, but d5 is pretty much solid. Of course, I'm trying to stop white from getting as much control on the central squares. After the move c4, I played e6. Now c6 is a move I've played often as well in this position. Turning into the Slav defense. So e6, with the e6, I'm just planning to go into the Queen's Gambit with a certain variation that I really play often. So after the move c4, e6, nice knight f3, a6. Now this is what we call the Janowski variation of the Queen's Gambit. So black is pretty much just threatening to take the pawn on c4 and then hold on to the pawn with the move b5. I mean, there's a lot of theory behind it. If you're not so familiar with this line, it's not something you want to just stumble upon and just decide to play unless you're really well prepared. So, but lately a lot of people have been just taking on d5, which I think is kind of like safer, and it actually gives white a slight pull. So after the move a6, captures on d5, captures back with a pawn. Knight c3 immediately puts pressure on my pawn on d5. I mean, if we check this position well, we could notice that the white knight had developed already. He has a pawn on the central square. I have just 2 pawns. That's about it. Somebody asked me during the game, no, after the game, how come I just had only pawn moves and my opponent had pieces in the game and it really couldn't do much. I said, well, there's a theory behind it. You just have to understand what the theory is about. Even though white has the first move, it's not an automatic win for white. White still has to come up with ideas on how to progress. So after the move knight c3, c6 is played, making sure the pawn is protected. Now the queen is free to move around anywhere she chooses to. After the move c6, bishop to f4, develops another piece. So white has 3 pieces in the game, which is very good. Black is yet to get a piece in the game. So here bishop d6 immediately. And you always want to contest this bishop on f4. And by contesting this bishop, you ease the pressure white has on the e5 square. So he plays queen d2, which is one move I've not seen before. This was actually my first move of seeing this move. Normally, I think it's his bishop takes, queen takes, e3, and then there's always bishop c2, there's bishop d3, queen c2, and all that. So knight f6, bishop d6, queen d2, knight f6. Knight f6 was played. After the move knight f6, it made another strange move that I really don't understand, g3. And now I have to mention this, this was a rapid game. And for me, and I know for some other people, there are certain ways you go about playing a rapid game. You don't play a rapid game the way you play a classical game. No, you don't. You know, when it comes to rapid games, you know, faster time control pretty much. You want to make a good move and then just make sure you stop your clock so your opponent's clock starts ticking. So I was really trying to look for ways to, you know, take advantage of the bishop d4 move. I mean g3, because I mean there's no point. So I have to develop my pieces anyway. I mean my pieces on the queen side are yet to get in the game. My king, you know, need to get my king into the corner where it's safe. You know, get all my pieces on good squares pretty much. So after the move g3, cast it right away. Bishop to g2, bishop f5, getting all my pieces on good squares. I mean, this is basic chess. Get all your pieces on good squares and then just watch what happens. Castles, h6. Now the idea of h6 is in case it wants to force attack my bishop, I can always pull it back to h7. Why do I want to keep the bishop but then diagonal? I like what the bishop is doing on this long diagonal. So, and of course by playing h6, I'm stopping the bishop from going to g5 to pin my knight to my queen, because there's always this e4 possibility, which is going to give white some good play. So h6, rook e1, rook to e8, and rook c1. E is also just going to get all these pieces on good squares. And this is one thing we always want to do. Get all your pieces on good squares and then just watch what happens. So after the move rook to c1, queen e7. Why did I play queen e7? You know, a possible would have been knight b d7, but that loses a piece right away because bishop on d6 is undefended. So the reason queen e7 came is to defend the bishop, and then knight b d7 is going to come, and then I also have my pieces looking all good. So all we're actually doing right now is positioning our pieces, and then based on the positioning of our pieces, the placement of pieces, we can start creating threats, you know, based on the pawn structure and all that. So queen e7, he takes my bishop on d6, I take back with my queen. Immediately plays knight e5. Number one, I have to say this, I was a little surprised at the way my opponent played. I never knew he could really play as well. You know, I mean, he's been a good player for a long time, but you know, we older players don't really play as much, and although he's even much older. So knight e5, coming control to get some squares on the e5 square. Knight b d7, trying to get all my pieces in the game. My opponent has his pieces looking good, and I'm trying to get my pieces also to look good. So here it takes the knight, which I think is a little premature. I don't think there was a need for that. You know, what else could he have done? I don't know. Could he have played f4? I don't know. Maybe, you know, because I don't want to take definitely. I'm going to drop a piece, and then he can look to play e4 at some point. I have 1, 2, 3. He has 1, 2, 3. So he takes the knight. Knight takes d7. Queen takes d7. e3. One thing I want us to notice in this position is with all the pawns on the dark square, without this light square bishop, the light squares are going to be very weak. And in this game, that's one thing I played for at some point in time. So after the move e3, rook e7, what's the plan? What's the idea? I just want to double the rooks on the e file. What's the point of doubling the rooks on the e file? Well, I thought to myself, in this position, for white to create some play somewhere, there are two things. He can either go for the minority attack, which is the b4, a4, b5, you know, create some play on the queen side. And then another possibility is to push the pawn e4. So my doubling the rooks on the e file stops the advance of the pawn in the center. So the only play white has is to go for the minority attack. I don't know why I keep saying majority, which is b4, a4. So rook e7, b4 right away. rook a8. Now my rooks are doubled on the e file. Why are my rooks doubled on the e file? Like I said earlier, to prevent the push and also to try to occupy the square myself and try and create some play. Create some play means occupy the square, look for possibilities. Because by the time you move pieces in your opponent's position, there'll be time when your opponent will either make a pawn move that kind of compromises his or her position, and then you want to try to look for ways to exploit that. So rook e8 and a4. Now there is a queen side play going, like I said, which is called the minority attack. So I don't want to just sit still and not do anything. Whenever there are plays on any part of the board, you always want to try to create some play. A move I thought about in this position was just to play h5, h4 to try and weaken the pawn structure, but I wasn't sure how well this is going to play out for me. So instead I decided to jump into the e4 square. So any capture on the e4 is going to actually give me a lot of possibility, because if the knight takes, the bishop takes, my rook takes, I always have the queen lifts, and then the light squares are looking pretty weak. So queen b2, he says no, he's not trying to exchange pieces, and of course I'm not trying to take the knight either. I'm just trying to show my presence in the center. So he played I think I played knight g5. What's the point of knight g5? Like I said earlier, the light squares on this position, the white's position is really weak. Why is it weak? Well, I won't say it's weak, but it can be compromised. Right now, the bishop on g2 is the only one that is keeping eye over these light squares. And if you look at my pieces, I have three possible pieces. The bishop, the knight, and the queen that actually has some kind of hold on this square. So all he has is bishop. So if he loses his bishop, he's going to get very compromised on the light squares. So knight g5, and of course, like one of the reasons I play knight g5, just wanting him to advance a pawn, because any pawn advance is going to create more weaknesses. So that's just the whole idea. So knight g5, he plays b5, he starts his attack right away. So he captures back, bishop h3. What's the point of bishop h3? My threat is simply to take on g2, king takes, queen h3 check, king moves, knight check, king moves, queen takes, checkmate, period. So now, why is this happening? Like I said earlier, once the bishop on g2 is off the board, this king is not going to be looking really good. And it's a very difficult task to try to push the pawn, either now or later, so that there could be some defense. But remember my rooks that were doubled on the e file? Yeah. That's why it's always good to put your pieces on the best squares possible. Or a potential good square. So after the move bishop h3 takes, it takes on b, c6, capture back. He has to play f4 right now. I think he has to play f4. Because if he doesn't play f4, like I said, the threat is just to take on g2, king takes on g2, queen h3 check, king has to go to g1, knight f3 check, king has to go to h1, queen takes h2, and that's checkmate. So here I place f4. After f4, of course, I took the bishop. It takes my knight. Now this is interesting. It takes my knight. Now he doesn't have his light square bishop any longer, right? So that means the squares here are going to be really, really looking bad. He doesn't have the light square bishop 1. He has a weak pawn on the e3 square, which is being eyed excuse me, by my rooks on the e file. So at this point, I simply pull my bishop back to h3. Even though the material balance is count is kind of equal, same number of pawns, same number of major pieces, same number of minor pieces. Excuse me. But the king is going to be very uncomfortable because of these weak squares around the king, thanks to my light square bishop. So he takes on h6. I take back. Queen f2. Excuse me. Now, I like this move because apart from the fact it defends the e pawn, he's also looking to try to put pressure on my weak pawn. Maybe queen f4 to h4, flush my bishop out. So he has possibilities here. Rook e6. What's the idea? I'm trying to switch either to the g file or the f file, especially with the f1 square looking really weak. So knight d1. Excuse me. Knight d1, defending the pawn. Well, there's a problem here. Yes, you're defending the e3, but your rooks are not connected. Not a good idea. And looking at this position, the main weaknesses black has really is the c6 pawn. There can be a lot of pressure on this, and the h6 pawn. So knight d1, queen e7, making sure these guys are tied to the defense of the pawn on e3. Queen f4, I like that move for black. You know, the idea is to, you know, put pressure here, and like I said, in substitutions, come and flush this bishop out. Rook f6, queen to h4, attacking the bishop. Queen d7 defends the bishop. I really want to move this bishop because it stops the rook from coming to the square. Knight f2 says, you know what, you really have to move that bishop because it's a little bit annoying. Yeah, definitely agree. So bishop to f5. Even though in this position the NG says kind of slight edge for black, but I really like my chances, especially in the endgame. Why? Because of the bishop against the knight, and of course I want to keep as much pieces on the board as possible. You know, going to an ending, you have to make sure you have a plus. Otherwise, you don't want to go to an ending where your opponent can easily equalize and then you really don't have much. So bishop to f5, rook c3. I like this plan for black, for white. What's the point? Put pressure on my weak pawn. Put pressure on the weak c6 pawn. So king g7. The idea of king g7 is in case I have to move this queen away somewhere for whatever reason, I don't want my rook to be undefended. And you know, I have this theorem I always give: whenever a king is defending anything, that's a weakness. So we can pretty much say for now, since the queen is attacking the rook on f6 and the pawn on h6, we can say this is a weak square. These two spots, h and f6. So king g7, rook threatens to win a pawn. Queen d7 defending the pawn twice, and then the king defends the rook. So my king is doing some work here, right? King g2. I don't like this move. This move, I think this is really one of the reasons why white lost this game. I think maybe best play, white could have been able to hold the game. Now, what's the point? What's the big deal about this move? These are just some theory I came up with. Anytime you're playing against a bishop, let's say your opponent has a light square bishop, try to make sure none of your pieces are on the light squares. For example, everything would have been cool except for this king on g2. Why? I have a light square bishop on f5. So as long as this king is on the light square, even though the bishop is not attacking the king right away, it's something you have to be worried about. And you're going to see why I'm saying this. Now, this is really good because all the other pieces on the dark squares, they can never be worried about having this bishop attack them in any kind of way. So king g2, rook a8. I like this move, rook a8. What's the point? The idea is to get to the second rank, try and put some pressure on this guy. Now, I noticed that none of these rook can move to the second rank to defend because of the bishop. So rook a8. The idea is just to move here and try and put pressure, because if I can get the rook to a2, there's pressure here, right? There's also pressure here. Now, I said something earlier. My king is on g7. He's defending the rook on f6, and he's also defending the pawn on h6. That's a weakness. The king on g2 is defending the knight on f2. Is there anything attacking the knight? Yes, there is. What kind of attack is that? It's called an x-ray attack. So it doesn't matter if it's direct or an x-ray. You have to always take a mental note of it. So after rook a2, rook a8, he plays e4. Now this is, you know, One thing I like to do when I teach is not just to give the reason why a move is bad, but the principle. You know, for example, you cannot start to look to open up a position when you have a knight against the bishop. That's one. Now, number two, opening a position on the same color with the bishop, it's a red flag. Because anytime a capture happens on e4, there could be a pin on this king. Remember the move I said king h2 was a very questionable move? Now we're going to see why it turns out that, the two combination of the king g2 and e4 is not a good idea. So take on e4, takes back, rook a2 check, rook blocks. Now the idea of this rook check is to bring the pieces on the light squares. To bring the pieces on the light square. Now we have a rook on the light square, we have a knight on the light square, we have the king on the light square. Earlier on it was just the king. Now that's the danger. So rook takes. In the game, my plan was to move the queen here, pin the knight, and win a piece. But then I saw queen takes f6. You know, lately I've been throwing away a lot of games just one move blunder, should I say? Although not losing but drawing. So of course, because of the pin on the knight on the rook, I simply move my rook to e6. Now I just want to capture a piece. If you move your knight, you're going to lose your rook. Now he plays knight c5. This would have been a very good move if the king was not on g2. So like I said earlier, we have to be very careful that the squares we move are king or pieces. You know, you might not see an immediate effect, but in the future, very near future, something might go wrong really fast. So of course I went for the queen d5 check. The king moves, bishop takes c2, knight takes e6 check, queen captures back. He plays queen f4. I don't know why he made that move, because I just saw an opportunity to trade the queens. Anytime you're up, you want to make some trades. Why? You want to reduce the ability of your opponent to cause trouble or wage war, and just make things easier for you. So queen f6, king e3, queen takes check, king takes back, king f6, very important move. I don't want to give this king the e5 square, and apart from that, my plan is just to come and attack the weak pawn, and then capture the pawn and then promote my c pawn. So king f6, g5, g4, sorry, king a6, h4, king d5, he has to defend the pawn. He defends the king a3, bishop d1, he has to push the pawn. Pawn is under attack. Takes, captures. Bishop h5. What's the point of bishop h5? Stopping the pawn from moving and also trying to pull the bishop to g6 to take the king away from the d3 so that this pawn can be captured. He moves his king to d3. Bishop g6 check, king to c3, and bishop f5. The king is no longer in a position to hold on to the d pawn. Once the d pawn falls, it's pretty much game. So after this game, I ended up with 5 out of 5, you know, and it was a good tournament. It was my first time playing the Blacks Knights Chess Championship, and Mr. Zachary, Colonel Zachary was actually one of the people that put them together with Mr. Ben Johnson. So that is it for now, and I think there are some other games I played in the other tournaments. You know, with time I'm going to share those games and give us some more videos. So for now, it is bye, and thanks for stopping by.